Hello and welcome to the Karger Expert Insights webinar for the University of Turku. In this 1-hour webinar, you will be hearing from Professor Kari Syrjänen, Professor of Pathology and Editor of a Karger journal, Dr. Simon Turner, Publishing Manager at Karger, and Dr. Ville Rantasalo, a recent PhD and early career researcher. Our speakers will share their insights and tips on how to best navigate the peer review process. Also, a quick reminder for library users at the University of Turku. The complete range of Karger e-journals and a good selection of Karger e-books is available in the library.
Hello, I'm a PhD from University of Turku. I'm a resident in TYKS, Turku University Hospital, and in this event I'm foremost a Karger ambassador. I'm kind of a young researcher contact link with Karger publisher and university, and this is an exciting new mission I've been involved in since last September, I think, maybe earlier. But actually, this is the first time we have arranged something like this. So this is going to be very interesting, and I'm really happy to present this topic, which is the path to successful publication, which is the really important and interesting topic to share with you guys and discuss. We have panelists first. Professor Syrjänen already joined us. We'll be discussing with him about this, the whole thing later on after I've presented a few slides for background. He's a PhD from Finland and actually lives in the same city as I do, so that's nice. Pioneer in papillomavirus research and so on. But I think Kari can tell more about him in the discussion session afterwards. Yeah, that's about me. I already pretty much told you about that. I'm a fresh PhD and in the beginning of my research career, and that's why this role as an ambassador has been really interesting, and I'm really happy about this. We could arrange this kind of a webinar for you guys. Tell something about yourself, Simon, real quick before we get to the topic.
Yes, sure. So I'm a publication manager at Karger, taking care of a few portfolios, pathology and cell biology, dermatology, and genetics. I joined Karger in 2020. And my role as a publication manager is essentially to support the editors, develop the journals, things in this area. So I'm sure I'm looking forward to this kind of discussion that we'll have about navigating the peer review and Karger in general. And it's good to have Kari with us as well.
Right, thank you. Thank you. So what is on the path to successful publication? From the idea to the published article, that path goes, and there are a few things to consider along the way. Let's not say obstacles, because the process is supposed to maintain scientific integrity. So this is path that should be taken carefully, but also it's for the science. I think there are 3 steps that I thought about are worth mentioning and worth discussing from my point of view, and afterwards we'll hear from the senior scientist Kari more about his point of view in this area. Well, first step, of course, would be choosing a journal. A variety of Karger journals are available at Turku, and that's a great thing. And the first thing in the path to publication should be to consider that who is interested in this science that I'm about to share with the community, because I think a lot of journals have wide narrow fields of interest that they are keen to share. So Journal of Orthopedics won't be interested in cellular biology and so on, and even I think cellular biology might have few subspecialties that are sharing their own research. So that's a really careful consideration there, because choosing the wrong journal gets you rejected, not because of the quality of science, but because of the journal wasn't interested, or they simply didn't know about your field and they couldn't therefore share it. The second step would be submission and the editorial process, and the third is revision, which is almost always happens before the publication. In the step one, I think the first 2 points are already discussed. The match of the journal is very important. You have to match the audience of the journal, and this is something to be discussed with co-authors. At least in my experience, this has always been a quite long discussion and a lot of emails about where to publish. People might have different ideas and different experiences from past, so they might like some journal over other, or maybe they think that some journal that they have published in before might be good, something like that. But this is always a discussion to have, and it will take some time to do that. Of course, you should be aware of the funding requirements, citations, and indexation of the journal. But these haven't been a problem in my path so far. I think, at least, can't remember any case where these four would have been a problem. But they need to be considered also. Step two, it's a bit. I think that's the second most work on this path. There are things to study besides the topic. Every journal has author guidelines and guidelines for preparation of the manuscript, and these I think these are important. They really need to be studied, because failing something here might show to editorial board that you haven't paid attention to the submission, and that might raise concerns that may not be true, but still it may render the publication to look like it's flawed or in some way, at least in my opinion, and therefore careful preparation is very important in this subject. You need an ORCID ID. I think every scientist has it, because almost all submission portals require you to link your ORCID ID to your submission. At least the papers I have published in, they almost forced me to link ORCID ID in my publications, and it's a free some kind of portal that collects your citations and your publications to be found. I think one thing to bring up here is preparing the figures and tables in the submission. We have exceeded the amount of tables and figures required by the journal and had no problem, because the content of these tables and figures was so important for the publication. It really carried out the science. So they will tell you that only 2 tables and only 2 figures, but if you have really good material in them, the editorial office might let you exceed some of the limitations carefully. Kari from the Editor-in-Chief's desk might have some insight on this in the discussion session. If you're publishing something really special, like systematic reviews and something like that, then you have very special guidelines to follow, and they need to be reported accordingly. For example, strobe strobe guidelines, if I remember correctly, they are for reviews and they can be found online, but they need to be fully satisfied for the publication to be okay. There's the last bullet is clarifying authorship details. Who is presented first and last? Actually, that's something that should be discussed before the path to successful publication. I think that's something that actually should be discussed in when the whole project of the research paper is being planned, because that might lead to some problems if there are differences in the team and disagreements about the order of the names. So I think I added that to step 2, but actually I should have added it to step 1 or even before that. But let's just say that has to be carefully thought before the submission. Okay, from the editorial office in step 3. These are things that are always required by the submission portal, and you can't miss these, but filling all of these might take time. In my first research, I was simply added to the licenses and ethics statements of the research, and when submitting the publication, I had a really hard time finding all the paperwork for the ethics statements and the license papers and so on. So that was actually really that took some time. So if possible, these should be prepared beforehand. The format of figures and references, they are usually guided strictly. Fortunately, there are a lot of tools in the internet. Citation managers, they can do all kinds of reference styles, and figures are easy to format in Photoshop or some other system. For example, in Photoshop, you can just put the image there and make the quality requirements matching, and then just download it in any format, and that has made figure preparation really easy instead of playing with PowerPoint or some kind of other software that's not meant for the job. In step 3, when we are approaching the editorial office, the cover letter, I'm not sure about the importance of the cover letter. Kari can tell us about that. At least in my opinion, in my short career, the good cover letters that I have came up with have led to publications, and those that I think later on I should have maybe written differently, they have led to long review processes and maybe in rejections. So maybe that's a way to give a first impression of the team to the journal. Maybe in step 3, in the case of failure, one wonders why that happened. These are from Karger team, because obviously I'm not aware fully of why, for example, my studies have been rejected if they have been, but these are actually quite understandable. First things first, what we already discussed, article not in scope. Even if the article is really good, if the journal is not about it, they will not be interested.
Simon, would this be a really good point to talk about Karger's position and how that works when publishing with a Karger journal?
Yeah, I mean, I think Vers mentioned some of the main ones. I mean, article not in scope is going to be one of the main reasons for a desk rejection. I'm sure Kari would agree. And it can be, it's why it's so important, I think, to read the aims or the scope of a journal when it's described, such as on the Karger journals. Even within the same portfolio, for example, you can have journals that are similar, let's say, but do focus on different things. And again, maybe Kari can speak to a little bit, but for example, within the pathology and cell biology portfolio at Karger, there are a few journals, but 2, as an example, is Apticides, of which Kari is the editor-in-chief. And then there's another journal, Pathobiology. And sometimes you may find that a paper is submitted to exercise logica that is perhaps, and Kari, feel free to disagree, is perhaps not as clinical, or doesn't have a clinical enough focus for exercise logica, in which case it actually might be more appropriate for pathobiology, and these are the kinds of things that are described in their scope. And of course, everybody wants to save as much time as possible, so that's why it seems like a simple, straightforward step at the beginning, but that's why it's so important, because if we're thinking in terms of going through the entire submission process only to have a desk rejection, because let's say the focus is slightly not within the range of what one journal likes or wants to see, let's say, then it's better then to have read that scope in advance and fully understood what that journal is about. Another way, again, thinking about some of these reasons for desk rejection, also connected to scope, I think, is not just looking at the actual written scope of the journal itself, because of course that's a few hundred words, but also looking at what the journal is publishing or has published recently, because that will also give you a very good idea of the kinds of papers that the journal is accepting. So the kinds of papers that are within the journal scope, and you can kind of gauge them with your own manuscript. Or is this in line with what's being published in the journal already? Or is it in fact different and likely a better fit for a different journal? Do you have anything to add to that, Kari?
I can only speak on behalf of my journal. So to go, so Acta Cytologica is traditional journal established almost 70 years ago, which is a good lifespan for any journal these days, because new journals come and go. So I would say that in this list of rejections, so absolutely the first one is in the top, so article not in scope, because people really sometimes they do not quite know what is clinical cytology, and Acta scope is only to publish studies where cytology is involved in some way in results, not only in discussion or so. So people send sometimes the topics which are related to anesthesia or surgery or something completely outside the scope. So this is number one. And then the second most important one absolutely is that the submission does not contribute anything significantly new to the field. So this is, of course, what the reviewers determine, and that's quite common reason when they suggest rejection, so that this study doesn't add anything significant in the field. So, and these two last one in the list are less common. So sometimes the study is poorly designed, but this is not quite common, because of course can be that the study cohort is too small if you study only 10-20 cases and try to make conclusions which should require much higher cohort size. So this can be reason. And poorly written, of course, but this can always be improved, so that if the content is otherwise good, so the reviewers can suggest that the language requires addition and other revision, so that this as such is quite uncommon reason for rejection, at least in our journal. So this is my view based on now 12 years experience as editor-in-chief. So.
Perfect.
And
Thank you.
about 250 submissions per year. So I would say that around close to 100 of those are really outside the scope of the journal, which is in a way is a problem, and we should do something to that. Maybe we can discuss sometimes with Simon, so that people should really start learning what is clinical cytology and stop sending papers on psychiatry and some physiotherapy and something completely different, because it takes the work of the editor, and also, well, you can see immediately if this is outside the scope. It does not take many minutes to decide that, but anyway, is a problem. I don't know what the other journals feel it, but at least in our our journal, this is the case.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the insight. I'll continue to my last few slides shortly, but if you, Kari, feel comfortable, I could ask one question about what you said earlier. That you just said. How would you feel if there was some research on your desk about something that's been already published a bit earlier, but the submission you are considering is made so that they can show that this method can be reproduced? Because at least in PhD school they taught me that one cornerstone of medical science is reproducibility, that any paper should be written in a way that it can be done again with similar results if one has similar data. So how would that kind of publication succeed if the mere point is to show that this can be done again?
Yeah, I think this is an important issue, of course, because to make, of course, there are two things in that. So if the new submission is complete repetition of what was published before, so it depends a little bit how you formulate the submission. So, but at least submission should be transparent in that, so that all the methods are described in detail enough, which makes the other authors to able to reproduce them. And of course, when something is a new subject, it's very important that other people can reproduce the results, and then it's very valuable, such submissions that confirm the previous observations. I can tell an example, so dating back to early 80s, when papillomavirus research was very new, and we described many entities for the first time, completely new entities. For example, association of papillomavirus in certain tumors in the upper respiratory tract, and we tried at least 5 to 7 journals, because they were always rejected because the authors were not aware of the situation, so they said it cannot be true. So sometimes when something completely new is being reported, so the editors and reviewers should be very open to the idea, and this is not always the case. And then someone is sending similar, confirming, then it's much more easier, because you already have the preliminary observations there, and then somebody who confirms that is very, very important. Also technical issues, of course, if you are describing some new method, which would be important that the other authors could reproduce also. So then such studies are very valuable. But of course, complete repetition, well, it's not easy to judge, must be judged case by case. But it's an important issue that manuscripts are transparent enough so that the methods are described in that accuracy that people who want to reproduce, they can do that without difficulty. And that's one point.
All right. Thank you. All right. Well, I think this is thoroughly discussed. Then let's jump back into my point of view as an early career researcher. The submission will almost never be accepted as it is. My supervisor, PhD supervisor, told me that if you get accepted straight away, that's something to celebrate on with a champagne. So that's really rare in their opinion, and they are experienced scientists who told me this. Revision can be challenging because the reviewers might ask you to jump to the moon and back, and sometimes the reviewers cannot fathom the whole data or the methods from your submission, and that might lead to lead to situation where they are asking something that doesn't even exist, and that creates challenges. But in my experience, not all reviewers need to be completely satisfied, because A, that's sometimes impossible, and B, when you do a really good job in revision, you end up with a enhanced version of your study, and you might be able to show with your revisions and edits that some point of the reviewer wasn't actually so important in the whole picture, and that might lead to a situation where some of their question loses their ground, and even in that case that point is not like edited or fixed, it may lose its relevance, and therefore even if that kind of question wouldn't be resolved, it may not be an issue. And even if you were able to do a perfect revision, it can still be declined. I think that's a bit rare after revision rounds to be declined, but I've had colleagues who have done a really thorough revision. Actually, they did recently 2 really thorough review rounds and really edited their publication, and then the editors of the journal, it wasn't Karger journal, but they rejected for some odd reason, and that was a surprise. But that's possible. It's life. And actually, in the other case, I'm referring to, they did the point 4 of this slide. They contacted the editorial office and asked about their decision. That are you serious? We did really thorough job, and they asked that, why did you let us believe that we're going through with this even though they decided to decline in the very last step. So that's kind of what I have thought about the revision rounds, that there are a few things that can go south even though you did perfect, but I think that's just something you need to know, that the revision request is not a guarantee of publication. That's something to be understood. This is an overview of the peer review process from the submission to acceptance or rejection. I think this is this is just to sum what we have discussed earlier. This is the image provided by Karger. Do you, Simon, have something you would like to add on this, or the whole process, or do we continue to the discussion session?
I think I can just talk very briefly about the CAG review process. I'm sure most people are quite familiar with the review process and the submission processes at different journals and different publishers. And as you can see here, you submit the manuscript and you have the preliminary checks. But what I want to really point out that I think is important for authors, researchers, when it comes to submit their journals, and it comes to, let's say, the submission stage again, and we're thinking about these preliminary checks. You can save a lot of time. You can make the whole process very straightforward by, again, checking, let's say, the journal's guidelines and what's required for that journal and what you would be required to include in the manuscript, especially when it comes to things like statements, ethics statements, things like that. If you're doing a clinical trial, for example, then Karger works in accordance with the IECM JE. So all the clinical trials need to be registered in a publicly available registry. With clinical trials as well, I think we recommend it has to adhere to some reporting guidelines, like CONSORT for randomized controlled trials, for example. trend for non-randomized trials. So these kind of things, these are always available in the guidelines of the journal, and you can say when you look at those guidelines, it will tell you, very clearly what statements should be included, what you need to include in those statements, whether it is, studies involving clinical trials with humans or with animals, for example, conflicts of interest, authorship, all these things. And then just by taking the time to read through these guidelines and making sure that you're aware of those requirements when it comes to that submission, when the editorial office, I should say, does those preliminary checks, they will be looking for these things, and they will, say, okay, this is fine, this is fine, this is fine. If there are any issues there, they will contact the authors and say, you need to update this, you need to update this, to get everything ready. And when everything's in order, in that respect, that's when it goes to the editor-in-chief, and they'll be looking at the content, the scientific content of the paper, and making their initial decisions as well. And that's when it goes back into, let's say, the kind of the review process that I'm sure everybody's familiar with. As Ville was saying as well, paying attention to what the review reports are is also very important. But yeah, I mean, not to take up too much time before the discussion, I just want to say those preliminary checks are they're important, and they're useful to check out in the guidelines, because I'll say you'll see everything that you need to do to make sure that the manuscript is processed as quickly as possible.
All right, perfect, thank you. And I think this is the most important and most interesting part of this webinar, because from such experience, I think we can learn a lot. These are some questions that I prepared, that I thought about when I was preparing this event, and we can start with these if you feel comfortable with it, and then I would like to start with the first one, because that was something that I wasn't prepared to when I received my first invitation to become a peer reviewer. It was clearly due to the method we were using, and I was thinking that what factors should I consider when I'm deciding whether I should accept or decline a request for peer review. What is the editor-in-chief's take on this, or Karger's?
Yeah, this is a little bit complex issue. So I can speak only again on behalf of Ahta. We are privileged in that we have a very, very large data bank of I think there are 2,000-3,000 names of potential reviewers listed in the file, which I can get easily accessed by different search terms, so by name, by expertise. So I have never had difficulty in finding a reviewer, and of course, because this journal is owned by the International Academy of Cytology, which is really an umbrella organization for clinical cytology worldwide. So people are highly supportive of their official journal, and they are motivated to act as peer reviewer and otherwise support the journal. So sometimes I have received spontaneous applications from people completely outside this community, so that they want to become a peer reviewer, and in that case, really we need to explore the expertise of the reviewer. So I have set a limit that to become a good reviewer in articles, you must have at least 20 published, a record of 20 published papers, so that it makes you qualified to start reviewing the other people's articles. So I would say that if you are at the very beginning of your career, so it's sometimes very challenging to become a peer reviewer. Before that, you should gain a little bit more experience in writing scientific papers, because that again is a field that you you only can become an expert by doing that. So I have said, having published 960 papers, I have said that I start gradually learning how to do that, but maybe that is over exaggeration. But in Finland, I would say that the level of a docent, which means that most universities in Finland require at least 20 published papers, then you can get a docent degree, and that, in my mind, qualifies you also to become a peer reviewer. Actually, it necessitates that you can review other people's work. And what factors should you consider? Of course, when you receive such an invitation, you usually receive the abstract, so that when invitation comes, there is a link or a direct copy of the abstracts when they ask you to kindly review this text. So of course you should read this abstract. And then one thing is that if you are too familiar with some of the authors, of course you should make yourself biased, so that you can decline just saying that I have a conflict of interest or I am biased because I know some of the authors or they are collaborators of mine, because that sometimes happens that people are suggesting the reviewers, then they put a list, the names who they know very well, and thinking that okay, those people will give good. This is one thing, but then if the next step to check, of course, the content of the abstract, if it fits, and if you feel really that okay, this is my field, and you know how this should be done, then you could, why not accept it? Because that's also a very useful process, because reading papers and making good comments is very educative process for yourself. So, but really, I think there can be many other opinions, but my feeling is that you need to have expertise in writing before you can really start reviewing other people's work. This is one thing. And the other thing is that you should be unbiased to do that. It's very important. If you accept reviewing papers from your friends, you cannot be neutral in your judgment, I think.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I think that's quite well in agreement what I thought when I received the invitation. Clearly, I'm not a docent yet, and I felt that should I be receiving this, and then that's the kind of idea that led me to ask this question. Thanks, Kari. Well, then there are a few questions that do you have any rules of thumb for conducting reviews, or do you have any expert tips for being an effective peer reviewer? I think that was discussed in a broad manner. If someone would like to add on that, please.
Hi, Kari. There was one question in the chat here. It was interesting to note that Kari mentioned that there's a general rule of 20 publications minimum before becoming a reviewer. Is that quite standard for other journals as well?
I would say, if I can jump in quickly, I don't think there's necessarily a standard, but certainly having published papers, having gone through the process oneself, I think is definitely going to probably help and just getting some experience there. But I would probably also reiterate what Kari was saying, and when one is invited to become a reviewer or review a particular manuscript, I think Kari touched on all the main points that we also ask potential reviewers to consider when accepting or declining invitation. And it's also in that peer review guidelines as well, that the reviewer has to think, does it fall within their expertise? How does one get expertise? Is by publishing papers and doing research, so they all know the topic. And also, Kari mentioned quite importantly conflicts of interest. It's very important to know for reviewers to consider whether or not they may have a potential conflict of interest with the authors or with the content of the manuscript, to make sure that so that they can remain neutral and unbiased. One thing I would add as well is something very important, and in more perhaps practical side of things, is to think about one's schedule. Does one have time to be a reviewer at that time? Does one have time to read the manuscript and give the constructive review as well? So something else to think about, not just expertise and conflicts of interest, but also, do you have the time to do the review as well?
Well, can I add one point here? So I have heard some other journals which do not have the privilege of having such a great data bank. So they often do so that when a new manuscript comes, so the editor looks the reference list in the manuscript, identifies some people who have published or included in the reference list, and then make invitations on that basis, and sometimes without checking how senior or junior is that author, but I don't know how well that works. But I have noticed when I was younger, then so I get a lot of invitations, and then I wonder why was this invitation sent to me, and then I identified, okay, I was included in the reference list that we have, that was due to that reason. So, but really these journals which have such extensive data banks are really in advantage, because then also now at Karger also has a new statistics. I have noticed very recently that in each name, when you open that, so you can see how many times he or she has been a reviewer, how many invitations she has received, how many times declined, and so and how long does it have taken to make the review process, and also including how many cases the review statement has received the grade of excellent or very good. And that's very useful, because then you can also avoid situation that you are inviting all the time the same people if they have reviewed just a few weeks ago or just a few months ago. So perhaps if you have other options, you can select the other names. And this is really a great function of Karger journals, which editors have available. And I'm quite happy with that, because then you have different options to select. But if you know someone already, then you can use the family name, then you can use expertise, keywords, and such things. And very useful.
At this point, I'd like to discuss the last question I prepared, because that's something that was it was the last in my mind, but also I think that's something that I've run into recently. So I think I take this opportunity to learn from you guys. So it's that's something I've noticed in publications, and at least in journals of my specific field of medicine. I think complicated and advanced statistical methods are becoming more and more prevalent, and more papers are using statistics that are really complex and even difficult to fathom without a degree in statistics. So first question is that, have you, Kari, noticed this kind of trend? And is this some kind of threat? Because I think a normal scientist may not be able to detect the pitfalls of very advanced statistics.
Yeah. This is very good point, and really you are completely right in that. So statistical techniques and methodology has developed tremendously during the past, let's say, 2-3 decades, and new analysis techniques have become available, and people also have started using them in the manuscripts. And I think this is sometimes is very good statement that these are really too complex to understand but also that makes such things also for the readers. If they are statistics is very complicated, and the readers do not understand that, and then they probably lose their interest in the whole article. So I know that some journals, they have used quite a long time already statistical expert in the review process. So if the editors and the regular reviewers feel that they are not expert in analyzing the statistical part of the study, they can check that expert in statistics is required. But I don't know, this Karger probably don't have that. At least in ACTA there is no such option that you can, unless you, of course you can, if you know somebody who is a statistical expert, probably you can put in the review report that the statistical review is needed. But in our field, this has been really not very often the case. But in many other fields, of course, it is very true in clinical studies, in clinical trials, and such randomized studies in parallel design or crossover design, or they require different statistical techniques. But these are usually, of course, mastered by the authors who submit, because they are sometimes, often is a statistical expert among the authors, so that they are responsible. And it's, I think, very rare that there is something wrong with these statistics, because if they're done by experts, so this should not be a major concern in most of the cases. Of course, sometimes the authors are just using them just to try to mask that there's something wrong with the data. Maybe the cohort size is too short or too small or something. Well, this is a complex issue, but it's really true that the statistical part of the manuscript has increased in length and the complexity, and sometimes it's really difficult for average reader. And for this reason, I think I don't know how is in medical education training nowadays, but it really would be an advantage that everyone who start the publication record also masters at least the basic statistical techniques, which are not so difficult now when you have the software you can use very easily and learn to use. And so there was one great epidemiologist globally known who told me once that, okay, anyone can learn how to use Windows statistics, but it's more difficult to learn how to use these statistics and in where to apply them. So technically they are very easy because you have Windows-based software. When you learn how to use this, okay, you can get results, but whether they are correctly applied, then is a completely different thing, and for that you need an expert.
Yep. Medical statistics is being taught in medical school in Turku. I was graduated in 2019, and we had one basic course of statistics, and what I've learned from candidates, I think that education has become better since I have graduated. So that's a good thing. And yeah, thanks, Kari. That's really interesting, and it's nice to know that I wasn't alone with this notion. I read from the one. It was actually a surgery textbook that there was some professor wanted to have a chapter about interpreting results of studies, and they wrote that if you torture the data long enough, it will confess to anything. And I think that might sum up some of this idea.
Maybe one point was a little bit neglected, and that is the document called rebuttal. I think what rebuttal is that when you get the reviewer report and then you start analyzing what are the points made by the reviewer. So it's very important that you make a point-by-point rebuttal, so that you analyze each point of criticism, and then if you feel it is okay, then you make a change. But if you feel that it's unjustified, then you must give a detailed arguments for not accepting the comment. So sometimes the reviewer has misunderstood something, and then you just respond and give good arguments why this comment is not adequate, not appropriate, so that you can check that point. And then rebuttal, when you give it details for every reviewer, so it's a tedious process. It takes hours and sometimes days to do that. But a good rebuttal is a very important document when you send back your revised manuscript, and good rebuttals, and then okay, reviewer reads, oh, now he has responded nicely this comment, okay. It means that you really, I think you said it somewhere here, you don't need to satisfy every reviewer, but just to give a good rational rebuttal. So it usually means that okay, you know the subject better than the reviewer, and they will accept. So you can never do a too good rebuttal. So it's very important to pay attention to that when you send back if you neglect or if you use language that is not so adequate. So if you get angry with this comment, it's not good policy. So you try to be polite by responding to the reviewer. And I can just tell you an example. Just 2 weeks ago, we get back one of our studies. So I made a rebuttal that contained text more than the original study. So I spent the whole Sunday making a rebuttal, and that helped. So we get the study accepted in a good journal. But really, it sometimes can be very tedious. But it's worthwhile, because then you can avoid rejection by just making a good rebuttal.
All right. That's an important message. Thanks. Really insightful.
So maybe we can wrap up there.
Maybe we can. I think that was a really good an hour we spent with this science, and there's a lot to think about for the rest of the day.
Marvelous. Well, many thanks to everyone. Many thanks to Kari and to Simon for their time, and above all, many thanks to Ville for
Thank you.
For really, we've been in safe hands this morning. It's been a real pleasure, and also many thanks to everybody behind the scenes, to Lena in the library, to my colleague Beth Bailey. We'll be sharing the notes. We'll be sharing a recording and also the slides after in the next couple of days. So keep an eye on your inboxes, and many thanks. Wishing everyone a good week ahead.